An abandoned German shepherd rescued a missing police officer. But what he did next left the entire force in tears. This is a story of canine loyalty that transcends human understanding, revealing how the bond between a man and an animal can save lives in the most desperate of moments. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment with where you're watching from. Winter arrived in Serra Branca with a silent cruelty few places in Brazil ever knew. Snow, a rare phenomenon in the country, covered the small town like a merciless white shroud, transforming familiar streets into unrecognizable landscapes. Residents huddled in their homes as the biting wind whistled through the cracks of poorly sealed windows, carrying with it untold stories and well-kept secrets. On that Monday morning, the thermometer registered 3 degrees below zero when Mrs. Marta, the owner of the central bakery, opened her doors and heard the news that would soon ripple through the entire town. Pedro Oliveira was missing. The police officer, known for his kindness and dedication, had not returned from his night patrol in the forest region surrounding the town. His radio was silent, his cell phone switched off. "He would never do this," insisted Carlos Silva, clutching a coffee cup that was growing cold between his trembling fingers. The sheriff, a man of few words and decisive action, quickly assembled a search party at the station. His weary eyes betrayed more than just concern. There was fear there, a rare feeling for someone accustomed to handling Serra Branca's minor incidents. The news spread like wildfire. In grocery stores, schools, and shops on every corner of the town, residents exchanged theories and worried whispers. Pedro was beloved by everyone. He had helped Mrs. Josefa find her lost grandson the year before. He mentored the youth on weekends and always stopped to chat with the elderly who sat in the central square. "He was here last night," remarked Mr. Antonio, owner of the gas station on the edge of town. "He seemed serious, quieter than usual, filled up the patrol car and headed north." The community, accustomed to the almost monotonous tranquility of Serra Branca, was now shrouded in an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. Mothers called their children inside earlier. Doors once left unlocked now echoed with the metallic click of deadbolts, and suspicious glances followed strangers down the street. Lisa Costa watched all of this from the window of her veterinary clinic. The young professional bit her lip, worried, as she absent-mindedly stroked a cat she was treating. She couldn't imagine that she would soon become a key player in a story that would forever change the destiny of that small Brazilian town. A story that began with a disappearance, but held twists that no one could have foreseen. While Pedro Oliveira's colleagues scoured the frozen forest and the deserted streets of Serra Branca, a silent shadow moved between the alleyways. Cautious paws left soft prints in the snow, quickly erased by the biting wind that swept through the small Brazilian town. In the narrow alleys and vacant lots, the animal moved with the precision of one who knows this hostile territory well, alert to sounds and scents that only his keen nose could decipher. He was Thor, a German shepherd, a former K9 officer, with a robust build even after weeks of scarce food. His amber eyes, once vibrant, now carried a deep weariness that contrasted with the vigilant tension he maintained. The unmistakable scar on his left ear, a memento from a past operation, marked his identity as much as his disciplined gait, impossible to erase even after his abandonment. Ever since the tragic death of Sarah, his partner and handler, the dog had roamed the streets of Serra Branca like a ghost. The townspeople saw him from a distance, but few dared to approach. Some left scraps of food in makeshift bowls, which the animal would only retrieve when no one was around. Mistrust had become his most constant companion, replacing the official vest he once wore with pride. On that particularly frigid afternoon, Thor smelled something different in the air. His tense body froze for a moment as his nostrils caught a familiar aroma, the same lavender scent Sarah used in her office. The smell came from a small package left by Lisa Costa near the old community shelter. The veterinarian had hoped to win the animal's trust, though she didn't yet know his true story. Thor hesitated. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, making him tremble from more than just the cold. He cautiously approached the food. A sudden noise made him flinch. Two officers from the search party walked by, discussing their colleague's disappearance, mentioning leads that went nowhere. The German shepherd watched the uniformed men with a mixture of recognition and apprehension. His instinct, honed by years of service, awakened. He knew this type of operation. He knew what a missing human meant. As the officers walked away, Thor remained motionless, torn between the past that haunted him and the impulse beginning to stir in his chest, a call to duty that would soon change not only his fate, but that of all of Serra Branca. On the third night of Pedro Oliveira's disappearance, the oppressive silence that blanketed Serra Branca was torn apart by a distant, mournful howl. The blizzard fell without mercy, turning the streets of the small Brazilian town into a white, hostile labyrinth. Few dared to venture out that night, except for Thor, the German shepherd, who had wandered aimlessly since his abandonment. Huddled under a torn awning on the outskirts of town, the animal shivered violently. His once glossy coat was matted and dirty, and the scar on his left ear seemed more pronounced against the white backdrop of the snow. Suddenly, his nostrils flared. A familiar scent, almost imperceptible to any other being, cut through the icy curtain of the blizzard. Human blood, mixed with sweat and fear. Thor rose with difficulty. His front right paw, injured days earlier while fleeing from teenagers who had chased him with stones, throbbed with every step in the deep snow. But something stronger than pain drove him forward. Years of training as a police dog were etched into his muscle memory, into his very soul. The scent was coming from the old warehouse near the industrial zone, an abandoned structure that had once served as a community shelter in better times. Now, forgotten under layers of snow and memories, the place rarely saw visitors. Thor advanced slowly, pausing occasionally to sniff the frigid air, confirming the direction. The biting wind whipped at his body, but he persisted, guided by something beyond human understanding. With every step he took, fragments of his past as a canine seemed to reawaken. The German shepherd ignored the hunger that had tormented his stomach for days and the searing pain in his injured paw. There was an urgency in that scent, a coded message that only he could decipher. When he finally reached the outskirts of the warehouse, Thor moved with the caution of a predator. His muscles, though weakened by hunger and cold, still remembered the discipline of his training. He approached a small opening in the side wall, where the wind blew less fiercely, and clearly caught the aroma of fresh blood. The animal paused, alert, his tired eyes fixed on the abandoned structure, while his ears picked up almost imperceptible sounds. Ragged breathing, metal against metal, heavy footsteps. There was someone inside, someone hurt, someone afraid. Thor hesitated no longer. With renewed determination, he moved toward the warehouse, resolved to find the source of that silent call only he could hear. The darkness inside the abandoned warehouse was nearly absolute. Pedro Oliveira felt the ropes cutting off the circulation in his wrists as he fought to stay conscious. 3 days of captivity had taken their toll. The cold seeped into his bones, and through the single broken window, a dark silhouette slipped inside. Pedro saw two bright eyes fixated on him. It was a large German shepherd, a visible scar on its left ear, advancing cautiously across the cold concrete. "Hey, boy," Pedro whispered, his voice hoarse from dehydration. "Did you come to keep me company at the end of the world?" The dog approached slowly, sniffing the air. When he was close enough, he surprised the officer by beginning to lick the ropes on his wrists, as if he understood the problem exactly. The saliva moistened the dry fibers, making them less constricting. "You're a smart one, aren't you?" Pedro murmured, feeling a wave of hope for the first time in days. Thor, though Pedro didn't know his name yet, stopped abruptly and turned his head toward the door. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. The animal positioned himself protectively between the officer and the entrance, an unlikely guardian emerging from the shadows. "Are you protecting me?" The question came out as an incredulous sigh. The German shepherd glanced back at Pedro, and in that tired yet determined gaze, the officer saw something he never expected to find: understanding. It was as if they both shared the same pain, the same abandonment. When Thor returned to licking the ropes and then lay down beside the injured man, offering his warmth against the biting cold, something profound and inexplicable was born between them. A bond forged in darkness, silence, and shared desperation. "We're getting out of here together," Pedro promised, feeling hot tears contrast with his frozen face. "I'm not going to abandon you." The dog rested his head on the officer's knee, as if sealing their mutual vow. For the first time in 3 days, Pedro no longer felt alone. The night was already dragging on when Lisa Costa closed her veterinary clinic. It had been an exhausting day, with several animals affected by the intense cold plaguing Serra Branca. She had just handled an emergency at the Mendez house, where a kitten had nearly frozen, and now all she could think about was going home to a hot chocolate. The snow fell silently, creating a white carpet that swallowed her footsteps. Lisa adjusted her scarf and pulled her coat tighter, feeling the icy wind cut across her face. That's when she noticed a movement in the shadows. A large, thin dog was approaching, limping slightly. The veterinarian immediately recognized the German shepherd who had been roaming the town for months. Everyone talked about him, but no one could get close. The animal was like an urban phantom, appearing and disappearing as if testing the boundaries between two worlds. "Easy, friend," Lisa whispered, crouching down slowly. Surprisingly, the dog did not retreat, his tired eyes fixed on her with a disturbing intensity. It was then that Lisa noticed what he was carrying between his teeth: a boot. Not just any boot, but a police-issue boot stained with dark red. The Serra Branca police crest was clearly visible, even under the faint light of the lamppost. "Oh my God," she murmured, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Lisa's heart hammered against her ribs as she made the connection. The missing officer, Pedro Oliveira. The entire town had been searching for him for days. The German shepherd carefully placed the boot in the snow, just inches from her. There was no doubt. The animal was trying to communicate something. Lisa extended a trembling hand and picked up the object, noticing the blood was still relatively fresh. "Do you know where he is?" she asked, knowing it was a foolish question, but unable to contain the hope in her voice. The dog took 2 steps back, looking alternately at Lisa and toward the abandoned industrial zone. The veterinarian understood the message. This was no ordinary animal. There was intelligence and purpose in his movements. "Wait," Lisa said, putting the boot in her bag. I need to take this to the station immediately. The animal seemed to hesitate, as if weighing whether he could trust her. The scar on his left ear looked even more prominent under the pale moonlight. Lisa knew that every minute was precious. The snow would soon cover any tracks, and if Pedro Oliveira was still alive, time was running out. She had to convince Sheriff Carlos Silva to trust this unlikely messenger. "I'll be back," she promised the dog, who watched her with eyes that seemed to perfectly understand the gravity of the situation. Lisa Costa ran through the frozen streets of Serra Branca, clutching the blood-stained boot to her chest. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the door to the police station, where activity had been frantic since Pedro's disappearance. "Sheriff, I need to speak with you. It's urgent," she called out, breathless. Carlos Silva looked up from the maps spread across his desk. When he saw the object in the veterinarian's hands, his expression hardened. He quickly led her into his office, closing the door behind them. "Where did you find this?" he asked, holding the boot with the police crest, now stained red. "I didn't," Lisa explained. "It was Thor, that German shepherd who roams around town. He showed up at my clinic carrying this." The sheriff examined the item carefully. It was unmistakably part of Pedro Oliveira's uniform. 3 days of relentless searching had yielded not a single concrete clue, and now a stray dog had brought them what could be the key to the entire mystery. "Are you sure the animal brought it?" he questioned, his skepticism evident in his voice. "Absolutely," she replied, fixing the hair the wind had disheveled. "And he seemed to want to show me something. Carlos, I know this sounds crazy, but I think Thor knows where Pedro is." Silence fell over the room. Through the fogged-up glass, they could see the other officers gathered outside, anxious for news. Everyone here knew Pedro. He wasn't just a colleague, but a friend, a neighbor, a part of the community now aching from his absence. The sheriff ran a hand over his tired face. 3 sleepless nights had left their mark. Conventional searches were failing, and time was running out. "Lisa, we're talking about a stray dog, not a trained K9, he argued, but his voice lacked conviction. "What if he's our only chance?" she insisted, leaning over the desk. "What do we have to lose?" Carlos considered this for a moment. The situation was desperate enough to warrant an unusual measure. He stood up, his mind made. "We'll run a silent operation. No sirens, no alarms," he ordered, calling over 2 of his most trusted men. "If that dog really knows something, we can't spook whoever has Pedro." For the first time in the history of Serra Branca, the police would bet everything on the instinct of an animal everyone had ignored. A dog once considered lost was now the only hope of finding a lost man. "Bring Thor in," the sheriff commanded, "and pray he actually knows what he's doing." The snow fell relentlessly as Thor limped back towards the abandoned warehouse. Each step on the frozen ground left a faint red stain, but the German shepherd ignored the searing pain in his injured paw. His body trembled with cold and exhaustion, yet something stronger drove him forward, a loyalty that transcended the instinct for self-preservation. As he neared the dilapidated structure, Thor's senses sharpened. He tasted the frigid air, catching the scent of Pedro Oliveira mingled with the smell of mold and rusted metal. With calculated movements, the dog found a narrow opening at the back of the building and slipped inside, making no sound that might alert Ray. In the darkness, Thor navigated as if he could see through the shadows. He carried a piece of thick fabric he had found near the entrance, a precious find in this desperate situation. He approached the officer cautiously, placing the cloth over his legs. "You came back," Pedro whispered, his voice thick with emotion and cold. His lips were cracked, and his hands, still bound, trembled uncontrollably. "Thank you, my friend." Thor tilted his head, his tired eyes fixed on the injured man. He nudged the fabric closer with his snout, in an almost human gesture of concern. Pedro understood, and with some difficulty, managed to drape the cloth over his shoulders, gaining a sliver of protection against the biting chill. Suddenly, the shepherd's ears shot up. A distant sound, footsteps in the snow, put him on high alert. Thor let out a low, almost inaudible growl and retreated into the shadows. It was his way of warning that Ray was approaching. Pedro understood the signal and closed his eyes, feigning unconsciousness. When the kidnapper entered, he gave his captive a quick glance and left again, never noticing the dog hidden among the dusty crates. As soon as the door closed, Thor returned to Pedro's side. The officer opened his eyes and met the dog's gaze, a look that, despite all the pain, conveyed sheer determination. "We're getting out of here together," Pedro promised in a hoarse whisper. "You and I are going to survive this." Thor lay down beside the man, offering his body heat while his senses remained sharp. The scar on his left ear seemed to stand out in the faint light filtering through the roof. There, in that moment of shared vulnerability, a silent bond formed between two survivors. With every passing minute, hope grew between them, not as a burst of optimism, but as a small flame weathering a storm. Restlessness kept Lisa Costa awake. Something about that dog's behavior deeply intrigued her. Sitting in her veterinary clinic, a cup of cold tea cupped in her hands, she watched the snow fall outside her window as her mind raced. "That scar isn't normal," she murmured to herself, recalling the distinctive mark on Thor's left ear. Driven by an impulse, the veterinarian stood and walked to the cabinet where she kept her oldest records. Her fingers traced over dusty folders until she found the one she was looking for. Lisa opened the special cases file and began flipping through documents from 3 years ago. Her heart pounded when her eyes landed on one particular form. "It can't be," she whispered, pulling out a photograph attached to the chart. In the image, a young woman smiled beside a majestic German shepherd. The dog had the same powerful build, the same deep-set eyes, and most telling of all, the same scar on its left ear. The file read, K9 Thor, partner of Officer Serra Mendez. Lisa's hands trembled. Sarah had been her friend in college before she pursued a career with the K9 unit. She remembered the day she heard the news of the fatal accident that had claimed her friend's life during a pursuit. At the time, it was said her K9 partner had vanished after the crash, presumed dead as well. "So you survived?" the veterinarian murmured, a lump forming in her throat. "And you've been wandering alone all this time." Lisa picked up her phone and searched for old news reports. She found articles about the case. Officer Serra Mendez dies in line of duty, K9 partner missing. The details matched perfectly. Thor wasn't just a stray. He was a forgotten hero, a survivor carrying invisible traumas. The revelation hit Lisa like a tidal wave. This animal wasn't just lost. He was searching for purpose, for redemption. The way he found and tried to save Pedro wasn't a coincidence. It was a deep-seated protective instinct, the muscle memory of years of training and partnership. The veterinarian wiped away a stubborn tear. Now she understood why Thor seemed so different from other strays. He wasn't just an abandoned animal. He was a fallen warrior who, even when wounded, continued to serve his mission. I'm going to help you find your way back, Lisa promised, tucking the photo into her pocket. From that moment on, Thor would no longer be just a lost dog in her eyes. He would be a hero looking for a second chance. The rescue operation moved forward in the pre-dawn darkness, under a heavy sky that threatened to dump more snow on Serra Branca. Sheriff Carlos Silva handed out bulletproof vests to his small team. Only 4 trusted officers, chosen to minimize any risk of leaks. Thor, his dark fur partially coated in frost, led the group with quiet determination. Follow the dog, but keep your distance. He knows what he's doing, Carlos instructed, watching as the shepherd sniffed the frigid air, picking up on signals invisible to humans. The trail led them through narrow alleys and vacant lots, until they reached the old community warehouse in the industrial zone. The place, which had once served as a shelter during floods years ago, now stood abandoned, a perfect blind spot on the town's mental map. "How did we not think of this before?" one of the officers muttered, recognizing the familiar building they had all overlooked in the initial searches. Thor stopped abruptly, his ears pricked. The scar on his left ear seemed more pronounced as he fixed his gaze on a side entrance. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Pedro Oliveira was inside. He knew it. Carlos organized the team with silent hand signals. 2 officers covered the back while he and another advanced towards the main entrance. Thor, ignoring all human strategy, bolted for a broken window on the east side. Inside the warehouse, Pedro was fighting to stay conscious. 3 days of cold, hunger, and fear had sapped his strength. His kidnapper, Ray Martins, paced nervously, checking his phone again and again. The sound of shattering glass made Ray draw a weapon. Before he could react, 130 pounds of canine muscle and determination slammed into his arm. Thor sank his teeth into the man's gun hand, forcing him to drop the revolver. "Serra Branca police! Freeze!" The sheriff's voice echoed through the empty warehouse as the team stormed in. Pedro, tied to an old chair, felt tears of relief stream down his dirty face. Thor positioned himself between Pedro and Ray, growling menacingly at the now surrounded and unarmed kidnapper. "He wouldn't let me die," Pedro whispered as Carlos moved in to cut him free. "This dog. He showed up yesterday, brought me food, kept me warm." As the officers cuffed Ray Martins, Thor remained vigilant, as if his mission wasn't quite over. The animal the town had ignored for so long had become the difference between life and death for one of its protectors. The rescue operation was a success. When the police stormed the abandoned warehouse, they found Pedro Oliveira tied up, dehydrated, but alive. Thor remained by his side, a watchful guardian. The German shepherd snarled at Ray Martins, keeping the kidnapper cornered while Sheriff Carlos Silva's team placed him in cuffs. "This dog saved my life," Pedro murmured, his voice weak as he was placed on a stretcher. His exhausted eyes searched for the animal who had been his only companion during his captivity. But as the sirens began to wail and the warehouse filled with loud voices and sudden movements, something in Thor shifted. He recoiled. His ears flattened, and his tense body betrayed a deep-seated discomfort. The scent of human fear, the sound of weapons being cleared, the flashing lights, it all seemed to awaken painful memories. One of the officers tried to approach him, extending a hand in a friendly gesture of thanks. Thor gave Pedro one last look, as if to confirm he was safe, and then vanished through a back door, sprinting towards the snow-covered forest. "Thor, wait!" Lisa Costa shouted, running a few steps after him before stopping, breathless. She watched helplessly as the German shepherd became a mere shadow among the dark trees. Back at the station, while Pedro received initial medical care, Lisa sat in silence on a bench in the hallway. Carlos approached with 2 cups of coffee. "He'll come back," the sheriff said, trying to comfort her. Lisa shook her head. "It's not that simple. That dog is carrying traumas we can't see. The scar on his ear is just the visible mark." She clutched the warm cup in her hands. "Thor isn't just running from us. He's running from his past." The veterinarian knew that behind those weary eyes was a story of loss and abandonment. The animal who had just saved an officer couldn't accept help for himself. It was as if Thor believed he didn't deserve a home, or comfort, or kindness. That night, as the town celebrated Pedro's rescue, Lisa stayed awake, staring from her clinic window into the dark forest. Somewhere out there, Thor was facing the biting cold alone, carrying invisible scars far deeper than any wound she had ever treated. In the weeks following Pedro Oliveira's rescue, Lisa Costa's routine became a personal mission. The veterinarian would wake before dawn, prepare containers of warm food, and strategically place them on the outskirts of Serra Branca. With an almost obsessive dedication, she would spritz lavender essence around the feeding spots, the same scent Sarah, Thor's former partner, used to wear on her uniform. "He'll come back," Lisa would murmur to herself as she drove her car down snow-covered roads, her eyes scanning for any movement among the trees. "He has to." Every morning, she found the containers empty, but there was never a sign of the German Shepherd. Sometimes paw prints in the snow revealed that other animals had eaten the food, deepening her frustration. Lisa kept a meticulous journal of sightings and rumors, marking a map of the town with every possible appearance of the dog. Her once orderly veterinary clinic now had an entire wall dedicated to the search for Thor. The winter in Serra Branca was proving to be particularly cruel that year. As temperatures dropped, the community's fascination with the hero dog only grew. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the rescue, featuring emotional testimonies from Pedro and the officers who took part in the operation. With no photos of the animal, the paper's illustrator created a heroic image of a majestic German shepherd, a stark contrast to the wounded, wary dog he truly was. On the streets, the stories multiplied. Some swore they had seen Thor patrolling the town's borders like a silent guardian. Others claimed he would mysteriously appear whenever children got lost in the woods. Sheriff Carlos Silva received daily calls from residents reporting sightings in locations that were impossible for a single animal to reach on the same day. "He's become a living legend," the sheriff told Lisa during one of their meetings at the station. "People need something good to believe in after everything that happened." To Lisa, however, Thor was not a myth, but a traumatized survivor in desperate need of help. Each night without any concrete news was another blow to her hope. She began to doubt if she would ever bring him back to civilization. Even so, every night before she went to sleep, the veterinarian left the back door of her clinic unlocked, with a clean blanket and a fresh bowl of water waiting just inside. Perhaps, she thought, when Thor was finally ready, he would know where to find his way home. The thermometer read 7 degrees below zero that night in Serra Branca. The snow had let up, but the cold remained biting, emptying the streets and forcing residents indoors early. Liza Costa was finishing organizing her files at the veterinary clinic, reluctant to go home. For weeks, she had been leaving food and a trail of lavender essence across town, hoping to attract Thor. The veterinarian glanced out the window one last time, watching the full moon bathe the city in its silver light. It was then that she noticed a subtle movement on the sidewalk. Her heart quickened as she recognized the sturdy silhouette of the German Shepherd, walking cautiously, sniffing the path she had so carefully prepared. Thor stopped at the clinic door, hesitant. The scar on his left ear seemed more prominent in the moonlight. Liza held her breath, afraid that any sudden movement would scare him away again. Gently, she opened the door and took a few steps back, giving him the space to decide for himself. The dog entered slowly, his paws leaving damp prints on the floor. He sniffed every corner of the room, recognizing the scents of other animals, of medicine, and above all, of the lavender Liza had strategically placed, the same scent Serra, his former partner, used to wear. "You're safe here," Liza whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thor circled the room twice before finally approaching the rug near the heater. He lay down with a deep sigh, as if setting down an invisible weight he had carried for years. His amber eyes, once always alert, now showed the accumulated exhaustion of countless nights in the open. Liza approached with extreme caution and sat on the floor a few feet away. She extended her hand slowly, stopping it in mid-air, offering the animal the choice to accept or refuse contact. To her surprise, Thor stretched his neck and touched her fingers with his nose. The veterinarian couldn't hold back her tears when, for the first time, the dog allowed her to stroke his head. It was as if an invisible barrier had finally shattered. Thor closed his eyes, surrendering to the affection he had denied himself for so long. "We both deserve a second chance, don't we?" she murmured, feeling that this moment transcended a simple connection between human and animal. On that silent night, as the city slept under the winter's blanket, two wounded hearts began to heal together. Thor had found not just a shelter, but someone who understood his pain and respected his time. And Liza, in her quest to save the canine hero, was discovering that she was also being saved by him. The news of Thor's return spread quickly to every corner of Serra Branca. Sheriff Carlos Silva, a man not normally given to displays of emotion, couldn't hide his feelings when he saw the German shepherd lying peacefully in Liza's clinic. After years of dealing with the small town's security challenges, Carlos recognized an invaluable ally. One clear afternoon, as the snow began to melt on the sidewalks, the sheriff gathered his deputies at the station. "We need to recognize who really saved Pedro," he said, running a hand over his polished badge. "That dog deserves more than food and shelter. He deserves honor." And so the idea was born. Thor would be named the honorary guardian of Serra Branca. The proposal, initially met with shy smiles, soon gained traction among the residents. After all, who better to symbolize the community's protection than the one who had risked his own life without asking for anything in return? The ceremony took place in the central square, with the illuminated town hall in the background. Liza arrived, leading Thor on a new leash, a gift from local shopkeepers. The dog walked with dignity, as if he understood the importance of the moment. The scar on his left ear, once a mark of suffering, now seemed like an emblem of resilience. Pedro Oliveira, still recovering from his kidnapping, made sure to be there. He watched the dog with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "I wouldn't be here without him," he confided to a fellow officer, discreetly wiping away a stubborn tear. The most touching moment came when Carlos Silva, in his dress uniform, knelt before the German shepherd. With slightly trembling hands, the sheriff placed a metal tag around Thor's neck, engraved with the words, "Sentinel of Serra Branca, Protector and Guardian." "This isn't just a title," Carlos declared to the attentive crowd. "It's an acknowledgement that courage and loyalty can come from where we least expect." Thor remained serene throughout the ceremony, as if he understood every word. When the tag was in place, he lifted his head and gazed at the horizon, drawing emotional sighs from the audience. That simple act of recognition did more for the city than any political speech. In the following weeks, a renewed sense of pride was palpable among the residents. Children drew pictures of Thor in school, the elderly told his story on park benches, and even the most skeptical admitted that something in Serra Branca had changed. The shining tag on the dog's neck became more than an ornament. It became a symbol of hope for a community learning to trust again. Thor's story inspired Liza Costa profoundly. In the weeks after Pedro's rescue, the veterinarian couldn't stop thinking about how many other abandoned animals might have untapped potential. That was how the Second Chance Project was born, an initiative to train shelter dogs to assist both law enforcement and local families. If a traumatized dog like Thor could save a life, imagine what others can do when given the right opportunity, she would explain during community meetings in Serra Branca. The veterinarian started small, with just 3 dogs from the municipal shelter and a makeshift space behind her clinic. What no one expected was how quickly the project would gain momentum. In less than a month, more than 20 volunteers were taking turns with training, and donations began to pour in from all over the region. Local business owners donated food, building materials to expand the space, and even specialized canine training equipment. Thor, with his scarred ear and deep gaze, naturally became the initiative's mascot. The German Shepherd seemed to understand his symbolic role, behaving with dignity during visits to schools where children listened, mesmerized, to the story of the hero dog. In hospitals, recovering patients found comfort in stroking his thick coat, as Liza recounted how he had found Pedro in the abandoned warehouse. What impresses me most is how he connects with people who are vulnerable, a nurse commented, after watching Thor gently lie down beside an elderly, bedridden patient. It's as if he knows exactly who needs him. The local press began to cover the project's activities regularly. A major city newspaper even published a full-page feature on the initiative, highlighting how a small town was revolutionizing the relationship between abandoned animals and the community. Carlos Silva, initially skeptical, became one of the program's biggest advocates. The sheriff managed to get a small budget approved by the town council so that 2 dogs trained by Liza could assist in search and rescue operations the following winter. What we're witnessing here goes beyond animal training, the veterinarian explained during an interview. We're showing that no one, neither human nor animal, should be discarded. Everyone deserves a second chance. As the project grew, Thor seemed to blossom in his new role. The dog who once roamed the streets alone now walked with purpose, as if he had finally found his true mission: to inspire others to overcome their trauma and discover their own potential to help. Pedro Oliveira's nightmares grew more intense with each passing night. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the images of the dark warehouse still vivid in his mind. Invisible ropes still tightened around his wrists, weeks after his rescue. At the station, the concerned looks from his colleagues felt suffocating. Everyone wanted to help, but no one truly understood what it was like to be at the mercy of death for days, counting the minutes, wondering if you would ever be found. "You need time," Carlos would say, resting a hand on his shoulder when the officer got lost in thought during his shift. But time only seemed to deepen the wounds. Pedro avoided night patrols and startled at sudden noises. The department psychologist spoke of post-traumatic stress, but the words sounded hollow to someone who could still smell the must and blood in his nostrils. It was on a particularly difficult afternoon that Thor appeared at the station door. The German Shepherd simply sat there, watching Pedro with those deep eyes that seemed to hold stories as painful as his own. There was no barking or exaggerated display, just a silent presence that said, "I understand your pain." "He comes every day at the same time," a colleague commented with a smile. "I think he's keeping an eye on you." Pedro approached hesitantly. He knelt before the animal and, for the first time since the kidnapping, felt tears stream freely down his face. Thor nudged his hand with his nose, gently licking it, just as he had that night in the warehouse. The visits became a routine. On rainy days, the officer would make space under his desk, and the dog would settle there, his calm breathing filling the void that fear had created. On sleepless nights, Pedro started driving to Liza's clinic, where Thor now lived. "He senses when you're not okay," the veterinarian explained, watching as the dog positioned himself protectively beside the man. "It's as if you share the same language of trauma." Slowly, Pedro began to talk about the kidnapping during his walks with Thor through Serra Branca's central square. Words he couldn't say to the psychologist flowed naturally as the dog walked beside him, attentive to every inflection in his voice. "You saved me twice," Pedro murmured one afternoon as they watched the sunset. "First, by getting me out of that place, and now by bringing me back to life." Thor just rested his head on his leg, as if to say that healing was a path they walked together, step by step, day after day. The peace that Serra Branca was experiencing was as fragile as a thin layer of ice over a lake. 2 weeks after Pedro Oliveira's rescue, Sheriff Carlos Silva called an emergency meeting at the station. New evidence had surfaced. Ray Martins had been just a pawn in a much larger and more dangerous game. "We have reason to believe there's a criminal organization operating in the region," Carlos explained, spreading photographs across the table. "They kidnap people they consider invisible, the homeless, isolated farm workers, people with no close family, for organ harvesting and human trafficking." Liza Costa, who now attended security meetings because of Thor, felt a chill run down her spine. The German shepherd, lying at her feet, lifted his head as if he too understood the gravity of the situation. The community was in a state of constant alert. Parents no longer let their children play alone in the streets, and businesses closed earlier. Fear had settled back into Serra Branca, this time deeper and more widespread. On a rainy Wednesday, Mariana Souza, a teacher at the municipal school, noticed a white van parked near the gate during recess. The vehicle, with its tinted windows and no license plates, caught her attention, especially because it seemed to be watching the children. She immediately called the station. Thor was at the veterinary clinic when the call came over the radio. The dog, as if possessing a sixth sense for danger, was instantly on alert. Liza barely had time to grab her keys before he was at the door, barking anxiously. They arrived at the school at almost the same time as the police car. The van was still there, its engine running. Two men in baseball caps got out quickly when they saw the authorities approaching, trying to blend in with the parents arriving to pick up their children. Thor didn't hesitate. He shot forward like an arrow, ignoring Liza's commands. With stunning precision, the dog intercepted the first man, tackling him to the muddy ground. The second man tried to run, but Pedro, who had just arrived, blocked his path. "We found ropes, chloroform, and fake documents in the vehicle," Carlos reported later, as the suspects were taken for questioning. If it wasn't for Thor, the sentence hung in the air, but everyone understood what could have happened. That night, many parents hugged their children a little tighter, silently thanking the dog who had once again protected their community. Thor, oblivious to his growing fame, slept at the foot of Liza's bed, exhausted but vigilant. To the town, he was no longer just the hero who had saved a police officer. He was the guardian everyone needed in dark times. The Serra Branca Community Center was packed that night. Residents from all over town crowded inside. Voices rose in a growing chorus of concern. After the discovery of the criminal network behind Pedro Oliveira's kidnapping, fear had spread like wildfire. "We need more police on the streets," a man shouted from the third row. "And security cameras on every corner," added a mother holding her baby. Sheriff Carlos Silva tried to calm the crowd, but the tension was palpable. It was then that the doors opened, and Liza Costa entered, followed by Thor. The German shepherd walked slowly down the central aisle, his imposing presence gradually silencing the agitated crowd. Thor sat down beside the sheriff, looking out at the residents with a serenity that only animals can convey in moments of chaos. The scar on his left ear, a mark of battles past, served as a quiet testament to the truth that even the deepest wounds can heal. "Look," Lisa said, gesturing to the dog. "Thor has also known the worst of humanity. He was abandoned, he suffered, but he chose to protect instead of fear." The veterinarian's words touched the hearts of everyone present. Without a single bark, the former K9 had achieved what no speech ever could, transforming fear into reflection. Carlos seized the moment to present a community security plan, where residents and authorities would work side by side. "Thor has taught us that the most effective vigilance comes from unity, not isolation," the sheriff explained. Meanwhile, Lisa's Second Chance project was gaining unexpected momentum. What had begun as a modest initiative to train abandoned dogs now received donations from local business owners and volunteers from neighboring towns. Just the week before, 3 rescued dogs had found homes with families seeking not just a pet, but a guardian. "Solidarity is like a chain," Lisa explained after the meeting, as Thor received affection from fascinated children. "Each link strengthens the next." Pedro, watching from a quiet corner, still grappling with his own demons, approached timidly. "He transformed our town," the officer commented, his voice thick with emotion. The winter raged on outside, snow piling up on the sidewalks. But inside the community center, a human warmth was melting even the hearts most hardened by fear. Without uttering a single word, Thor had taught Serra Branca that true security didn't come from high walls or sophisticated cameras, but from the courage to trust and the determination to protect one another. Despite the fame he had earned, Thor carried invisible scars that not even time seemed able to completely heal. On certain mornings as the sun barely crested the horizon of Serra Branca, the German shepherd would disappear for hours. The townspeople already knew where to find him, lying on the cold floor of the old clinic that had belonged to Sarah, his deceased partner. Lisa Costa would watch from a distance, respecting the silent ritual. The dog would remain motionless, his eyes fixed on the empty chair where Sarah used to sit, as if he could still feel her presence. The scar on his left ear seemed more pronounced in these moments, a physical reminder of all he had lost. "He needs these moments," the veterinarian explained to Pedro one afternoon, as they both watched Thor through the window of the abandoned clinic. "It's as if he's talking to her, telling her about his new life." Pedro Oliveira nodded, understanding better than anyone. Since the kidnapping, he too carried invisible ghosts. The officer approached the entrance but didn't dare interrupt the animal's sacred moment. "Sometimes I wonder if he knows he saved the whole town, not just me," Pedro murmured. "I think he was just looking for a place to belong again," Lisa replied, adjusting her coat against the lingering chill in the wind. On rainy days, Thor would stay longer in the old clinic. City officials had suggested demolishing the abandoned building, but Carlos intervened personally. The sheriff understood that the space was a sanctuary of memories, as important to Thor as the Second Chance project was to the rest of the community. Once a week, Lisa would leave a small bouquet of lavender near the door, not to attract Thor as she had in the beginning, but as a gesture of respect for Sarah's memory and the animal's grief. The veterinarian knew that healing didn't come from denying pain, but from fully accepting it. On the peeling walls of the clinic, someone had hung an old photograph, Sarah and Thor on their first day as partners. The dog would sometimes nose the image, as if searching for a trace of her familiar scent. His grief is so human, the sheriff once remarked, surprising Lisa with his sensitivity. Maybe that's what connects us to them, she replied. The capacity to love so deeply that absence becomes a constant presence. And so, between public heroism and private grief, Thor continued on his path of healing, teaching everyone in Serra Branca that even heroes have the right to carry their sorrows, and that doing so never made them any less brave. The first flowers timidly peeked through the last remnants of snow as Serra Branca finally bid farewell to the most difficult winter in its history. The central square, once silent and deserted, now overflowed with voices and laughter as the townspeople prepared for the spring celebration. But this year, the festival held a much deeper meaning. They weren't just celebrating the end of the cold season, but the rebirth of an entire community that had faced its fear and discovered its own strength. At the center of this transformation stood three unlikely figures: an abandoned dog, a traumatized police officer, and a determined veterinarian. Pedro Oliveira watched the activity with a gentle smile. His eyes, once marked by the terror of captivity, now reflected a serenity he had reclaimed day by day. At his side, Thor remained vigilant, as if still silently fulfilling his mission to protect the man he had saved months ago. I never imagined one animal could change an entire town so much, Lisa Costa commented, approaching him with a blue ribbon in her hands. The veterinarian had coordinated all the preparations for the special ceremony that afternoon. Sheriff Carlos Silva stepped onto the small improvised stage and called for everyone's attention. Today we celebrate not just the arrival of spring, but the courage that blossoms in the most unexpected places, he announced, his deep voice carrying a contained emotion. When Thor was called to the stage, accompanied by Pedro and Lisa, a respectful silence fell over the crowd. The German shepherd walked with dignity, the scar on his left ear like a medal from battles past. His eyes scanned the audience as if he recognized every face, every story. The official plaque of Sentinel of Serra Branca was affixed to a special collar, while Carlos read a brief history of the dog's actions. There wasn't a dry eye in the square when he mentioned how Thor, though injured and abandoned, chose to risk his life to save a stranger. This dog taught us that no one is disposable, Lisa declared, her voice thick with emotion. Not people, not animals. We all deserve a second chance. Pedro, usually reserved, surprised everyone by taking the microphone. Thor found me when I had already lost hope. He didn't just save my life. He gave me back my faith in humanity, he confessed, stroking the dog's fur. Applause and tears marked the end of the ceremony, sealing a new pact of hope among the residents. The spring in Serra Branca was not just a change of seasons. It was the symbol of a community reborn from the shadows of fear, united by an unlikely four-legged hero. When the snow had melted completely, revealing the first buds of spring, Thor was no longer seen as just a stray dog. On the streets of Serra Branca, he walked with dignity, always met with looks of admiration and respect. He wasn't just Pedro Oliveira's savior. He was the living symbol that second chances exist for everyone. Lisa Costa's clinic became a meeting point, not only for injured animals, but for people searching for hope. The veterinarian, with her tireless dedication, had transformed the Second Chance Project into a national benchmark for the rehabilitation and training of abandoned dogs. What we learned from Thor goes far beyond a rescue, Pedro commented during an interview on local radio. The officer, now recovered from his trauma, was back patrolling the streets, but with a new sensitivity. His visits to schools, always accompanied by the German Shepherd, inspired children to see courage where others saw only scars. Sheriff Carlos, initially the most skeptical, became a staunch defender of the initiative. Under his leadership, the precinct incorporated rescued dogs into their preventive work, creating a network of protection that went beyond guns and badges. On nights with a full moon, you could still see Thor sitting near Sarah's old clinic, as if paying a silent tribute to the past. Lisa respected these moments, understanding that healing doesn't erase memories, it simply teaches us how to live with them. The Sentinel of Serra Branca plaque was more than an honorary title. It represented a pact between the community and its protectors, whether they were human or animal. When tourists asked about the story of the dog with the scarred ear, the residents would proudly tell how an abandoned animal had transformed everyone's destiny. Thor's impact crossed borders. Neighboring municipalities adopted similar programs, and the story of the German Shepherd, who sniffed out hope in the middle of a blizzard, inspired rescue projects across the country. On a sunny afternoon, as Thor rested on the grass of the central square, surrounded by children who treated him like a living legend, Pedro and Lisa exchanged a knowing glance. They both knew that some souls, even the most wounded, are born to light the way for others. Serra Branca had learned the most valuable lesson of all. There are no perfect, untouched heroes, only hearts willing to overcome their own suffering to soothe the pain of others. And as long as Thor continued to patrol its streets, the small town would know that even the harshest winter eventually gives way to spring.